Seeing the title of today's WEAll talk is the cost of oil, who pays, who profits. And it's not just about the cost, right? And it's not just about oil. It is about the wider fossil fuel system and the deeper cost that it carries. And I'm not going to speak too much into that because our guest speaker is going to be speaking about that, from inequality to the environment, to the health impacts, to the power dynamics, and the ways that these systems shape our lives. But what's more exciting is the speaker himself. We're very, very excited to have let me just add, Dr. Kumi Naidoo, who is a fellow South African. He actually just lives down the road from me. He's a South African human rights activist, environmental justice activist, and currently the president of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And actually, they've changed their name to just the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative, which is really great for me. He has served as the Secretary General of Amnesty International. He was the first person from the Global South to lead the Greenpeace International organization. And he is just deeply involved in global justice movements. He serves as an ambassador for the Africans Rising for Justice, Peace, and Dignity. And he continues to support initiatives that connect art, activism, like the global artivism movement, all towards social change. He's also the author of Letters to My Mother, The Makings of a Troublemaker, and the host of the podcast Power, People, and Planet. So really appreciate having you, Kumi Naidoo. I'm going to hand over to you to do your presentation.
Thank you so much, WEAll, for that super kind introduction. If you don't mind me saying, there's another way you could have introduced me, and that is
Oh,
you could have said, this guy has been around for a long time, for more than 40 years of activism, and actually has very little to show for it, given the state of the world at the moment. Uh, but let me start there. I mean, the moment we find ourselves in is one where we are called upon to be brutally honest with ourselves. As the West African anti-colonial leader Amilcar Cabral from Guinea-Bissau once said, we should tell no lies and claim no easy victories. So within that context, I just want to start by saying that right now, I'm more nervous speaking to any audience than I was when I was a teenager fighting the apartheid system, because sometimes this question comes up, and the question at the end of a speech in the Q&A, which some of you might end up asking, so I'm going to ask it now, which is, um, Kumi, have you heard of Dr. Martin Luther King? And it was asked to me about 10 years ago in the US. And I said, yes, he inspired me and many people in our struggle against apartheid. And then they say, do you know what his most famous speech was called? And thinking it's a trick question, I say it very gently. I say, I have a dream. And they shout back, yes, it's I have a dream. When I hear you speak, it sounds like you have a bloody nightmare. The oceans are rising, the forests are disappearing, fascism is on the rise, and so on. So herein lies the first major challenge we face, which is how can we talk about a broken economic system, a broken energy system, and so on, in a way that does not make people feel that, oh my God, the problem is so big and impossible, we'll never be able to win, and it's kind of too late. How can we not sanitize the fact that humanity is in a deep crisis on the one hand, but how can we do it in a way that also inspires, energizes, motivates, and so on? So that I would say is the real major challenge for all of us as individuals in our own life, as we struggle with what we see in the news and social media and so on. So I want to bring you into the conversation immediately by asking you this question. Where do you think we are in addressing the pressing issue of climate change? Option one, no reason to panic. Things are largely on track. We can trust our government and business leaders to get us to where we need them to. Option two, the challenge is massive and the window of opportunity is fast closing, but it's still within human ingenuity, creativity, and courage to broaden that window and move us away from the suicidal trajectory we're currently on, because of our addiction to oil, coal, and gas. Option three is the we are too late option. And if you'll pardon Tobila and I a liberty, I'll just state option three in one of the languages from South Africa, derived from Dutch, Afrikaans. Option three, you can say, is deep, deep, deep in the kak. I hope that you don't need too much of translation to know. So quickly in the chat, if you don't mind, please just put one, two, or three. And Tubile, if you can just give me a readout of where people are, that would be great. And let me be honest with you as you are putting your answers. There are days when I wake up, for me personally, it's two. And there are other days when I wake up where it's closer to three. I think when Donald Trump got elected, it was probably four. Uh, you know, so what
There
are
are
the
many
answers?
twos, many
Okay.
twos. Um, there are some threes, although they acknowledge it's sad to say that there's a three. There's one person, Elaine, is saying 2.5 question mark, exclamation mark. So
Okay.
kind of in between. Yeah, but many twos. I think definitely between two and three.
Okay. And I
And
think,
and Rachel saying problem is a little bit wider than this. So
yeah.
interesting to see that.
So thank you everybody for your responses. And I think it's good that there's no right answer here. None of us are sure. And but I think it's good that we stay in the two zone because we want to believe that human ingenuity, creativity, courage, and creativity can help us turn things around. So when we think of the crisis of the climate, we got a crisis of meaning and a crisis of language, right? Uh, and when we talk about its disconnection from the main cause, right? So for one, when you go home this weekend and you have an extended family lunch or brunch with some friends thrown in for good measure, how many of you feel confident that you can explain to them what you experience in this conversation, right? It's a question I pose very often to all the workshops and so on I participate. And oftentimes, most people say, actually, I really won't be able to explain this in a way that is understandable. And herein lies a big problem that we have made some real major tactical errors, right? One is we framed the challenge of climate change as a challenge of um, environment rather than a cross-cutting challenge. And then in terms of language, we talk a language of degrees, parts per million, gigatons, uh, you know, systemic change, and so on. And the reality is, far too many people in the world are just not using that language. They are too busy struggling to survive for them to have a grasp of that. And far too often, we are talking to ourselves. So what matters right now is really to transform power. And to do that, we have to recognize that our addiction to oil, and right now we see what's happening in the Middle East. I tell a story about during the Iraq War. Some of you who are older will remember the Iraq War was called Operation Iraqi Freedom, right? And it was as it violated international law. Right, just like now with Iran, it's going in on a false pretense and all of that. And the joke was that actually originally it was going to be called Operation Iraqi Liberation. And then somebody said, hey, no, 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 that's too obvious because Operation O Iraqi I, Liberation L would have spelled oil, and they changed the name from Operation Iraqi Liberation to Operation Iraqi Freedom. So right now, what the world is seeing, that one true cost of oil and fossil fuels more generally is that fossil fuels breeds conflict. It's been with us for a long time. If you look at the history of military interventions and all of that, for decades and decades, you will see that oil and other fossil fuels has been at the center of conflict. Our question then is, how do we transform from a energy source that is so baked into our lives at multiple levels, and how can we do that in a just and fair way? And um, and why we absolutely have to do that is 86% of what drives the climate crisis is in fact our addiction to fossil fuels. And as the Secretary General of the United Nations recently put it, he said investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure is moral and economic madness. So I just want to stop for a second here and ask you to figure out all the big words that we use when we talk about climate. And just imagine a very simple situation, right? You wake up one morning, you rush to work or school because you're running a bit late. When you get back home at the end of the day, you open the door and you see there's some water coming out of your bathroom. As you pass the kitchen, you pick up the mop and you proceed to the bathroom. You open the bathroom and you see that there's that rushing in the morning. You left the stopper on and the tap was dripping and it's overflowed, and that's why water was now in the bathroom. In the passageway? What do you do first? Do you start mopping the floor first, or or do you turn off the tap first? Of course, you turn up the tap first. And for 30 years, since the science was crystal clear on what we need to do, we have been mopping the floor without turning off the tap. And that's what the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty or the Treaty Initiative is trying to do. So none of us believe that we can transition off oil, coal, and gas overnight, but we need a fast, fair, and just transition as fast as possible. We should not be investing new resources into fossil fuels, as the Secretary General himself has said, and we need to make sure that the phase out is not simply greening a broken economy, but building an economy that is more inclusive and more green at the same time. Because green growth, as we've come to know it right now, is not necessarily promoting a well-being economy in any substantive way. It's just keeping the system in place, but just greening it. One of the countries has taken a leading role in calling for the fossil fuel treaty has been Vanuatu. And in calling for it, their president said this is to phase down coal, oil, and gas production in line with the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal and enable a global just transition for every worker, community, and nation with fossil fuel dependence. So I just want to pause there quickly and then just ask you this question. Now, I'm not going to assume that when we say 1.5 degrees, everybody knows what we're talking about because I'm sure most of you do, but just in case anybody doesn't. So, what the science has been saying is from the moment that we started the Industrial Revolution or started burning coal, oil, and gas, from that moment into the future, we cannot sustain more than a 1.5 degree aggregate temperature rise. Now, my question to you is, where are we now towards that 1.5 degrees? Please put your answers in the chat. Are we at 1 degree? Are we above it? Are we below it? How safe are we? And don't look at ChatGPT or DeepSeek in quickly, yeah?
There's 1.4, 1.9, 1.5. We've passed it. We're above it, above, very close to 1.5. Someone's saying, I believe we've hit it. So many different answers. 1.6, 1.5, further than we should be. We're beyond it. Yeah, and many saying above it.
So basically, we have hit it, right? And people are right. You're all in the right ballpark. So you would think that the science has been telling us that we must not breach this for so long. You would think our policymakers and so on would be pulling out their hair in panic, as would we in civil society. But we have not created the context of sufficiently, large numbers of people who understand and want to get engaged and who can see that we can have a double win if we do this right. Okay. And the double win that we want is that we want to be able to make the transition where we don't have only a win for the climate, but we also have the win for a just well-being economy as well. This graphic on the left-hand side was from the Copenhagen Climate Summit, where we were calling for a fab deal, not a fabulous deal, but a fair, ambitious, and binding deal in 2009. And what we've been getting every year since then has been a flab deal, FLAB, full of loopholes and bullshit, to be honest. And this was, saying, what if the whole thing was a hoax? And it's an important question to ask, actually. Assuming for a second, um, burning of fossil fuels was not driving climate change, should we still be betting on a finite source for our long-term energy use? Because obviously we live on a finite planet, and at some point we're going to run out. So it's nonsensical, even if you take the climate risk out of it. So the system will the landscape is always giving us warnings, right? There was a big financial crisis in 97, there was another one in 2008, 2009, and there was COVID. When we're in the crisis, our leaders do summon up more courage than they normally do, and they will say the right things. For example, during the 1997 Asian financial crisis, our leaders, from the president of the World Bank, president of the US, many other powerful leaders, all said the world needs a new international financial architecture. But the moment the band-aid was put over it, it was business as usual. So with COVID, you'll remember they said, build back better. After COVID, we'll build back better. We're not building back better. In fact, we're not even building back in many countries. So, so the approach in a crisis that teaches us that we need to change is all about system recovery, system protection, and system maintenance, when what we critically need right now is system innovation, system transformation, and system redesign. I'm happy to just let you know that even though for 30 years of negotiations at the COP, only 1 year there was a weak mention of fossil fuels, even though it's 86% of the problem. Finally, about 60 countries, ambitious countries, are coming together at the end of this month to focus on the root cause of climate change in the first conference to transition away from fossil fuels. And this is now thankfully linked to the COP process as well. So I want to end by saying that at a very personal level, right, the moment we find ourselves in is like tough, right? I can tell you that. So I thought rather than end on a very serious note, I will end on this proverb and just tell you one quick story. So the pessimism that genuinely emerges from our analysis, our lived experiences, and our observations can, must, and should be responded to by the optimism of our thought, our action, our creativity, our sense of courage, and our sense of humanity. Now, to the story that I want to end with is when I was 22 years old, I was fleeing South Africa into exile. And my best friend at the time, a guy called Lenny, asked me, Kumi, what is the biggest contribution we can make to the cause of humanity? I said, wow, that's a very easy question. It's giving your life. And he said, you mean going, participating, getting shot and killed and becoming a martyr? I said, I guess so, because that's what was happening in South Africa at that time on a regular basis. And he said, it's the wrong answer. It's not giving your life, but giving the rest of your life. I was 22 years old that time. I didn't understand what he was talking about. He was way ahead of us. And 2 years later, he was brutally murdered by the apartheid regime. And I had to think about that distinction that he was making between giving your life versus giving the rest of your life. What he was saying is a struggle for justice, economic justice, social justice, climate justice, gender justice, and so on. These struggles are marathons and they're not sprints. And that the biggest contribution that any one of us who've had the privilege of education, understanding, and knowledge is to use those skills for as long as those struggles exist. And so I want to say to each and every one of you and everybody I speak to at the moment, I feel the anxiety, the pain, and so on, but remind yourself every single day that the world would be a more pessimistic place were it not for what you do and the work that you seek to do and the difference that you seek to make. So thank you for what you do, and I'm very happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you, Tabile, and back to you.
Thank you so much, Kumi. I'm always so inspired by the story you share about Uncle Lenny and that this is a marathon. I think a lot of people that I've been speaking to in the last 2 weeks, I think people are feeling really heavy. I heard the Pope's speech yesterday about what do you call it? This global season of indifference, where we are just bombarded with so many things happening at the same time. Every single day, there's something else. And it's almost easier sometimes. There's a temptation to kind of just retreat and withdraw and dig yourself a hole and hide from everything. But yeah, I'm encouraged that, yeah, maybe there are days that we need to do this, but if we do see this as a marathon, there can be pauses in between. But actually, this is for the long run. And we can create spaces in between to kind of refresh, recuperate, and have spaces like this where we can sense make together. So, really appreciate you sharing your reflections and some of your thoughts so far. We are going to get into Q&A with everyone here on the call, and we'd love to hear kind of what's coming up for you, what's alive for you, what are you feeling you want to tap into with Kumi. I just wanted to ask question, I guess, before we go to the audience. You have often spoken about this theme of affluenza, is how you speak to it. And there's so much of this. I guess this question that comes up for me is obviously the issue is that fossil fuels are harmful, but at the same time, we have this economic system that has been dependent, and still continues to depend on extracting value, not just from fossil fuels, but from every part of society and the environment. And so I wanted to kind of hear your sense or your understanding of this economic system and this concept of affluenza. I think it will really help that community from economic systems change kind of see or hear your perspective on it.
Okay, so thank you very much for that question. The first thing I would say is that conceptually and methodologically, we've had a flawed way of measuring wealth and prosperity and progress. GDP is a fundamentally flawed measurement of wealth. For shorthand, I'm just going to refer you to a book by Lorenzo Fioramonti called GDP, Gross Domestic Problem, the world's most powerful number. The second problem we have is that at a marketing point of view, like say with fossil fuels, for example, we have been made to feel guilty because we use it. It's not like any one of us was saying, hey, we want fossil fuels, give us dirty energy, give us dirty energy. We ask for energy, right? Not dirty energy, right? And so we've been socialized into believing, and that's why I say the worst disease that humanity faces is a disease we can call affluenza, because rich and poor have been led to believe that a good, meaningful life comes from more and more and more material acquisitions. So, in the process, just like with the GDP, right? So, like with GDP, if you chop down a forest, it's a tick, 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 very good thing for GDP measurement, right? If you overfish, right, and you're killing stocks in the ocean, tick, 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 very good for GDP, right? So, we have to get people to recenter again, and the biggest challenge we face is that we have to get people to believe that excessive, unstoppable, meaningless accumulation and consumption, right, is is what's going to kill us. It's what's killing us spiritually, right? Societally and ultimately as a species. I like to provocatively say to people, the planet does not need saving. If we continue like this and warm up the planet, destroy our soil, destroy our water resources and all, the end result is we will be gone, the planet will still be here. And the truth is, if we become extinct the species, the oceans will recover, the forests will grow back, and so on. So we have to, like in a very direct way, say to ourselves every day in this work that we are fighting here for humanity's survival. And given the stakes, we have to be asking the question, how long can we have such an unequal, you know, consumption sort of patterns? And just remind ourselves, right? Let's do another quick quiz. Um, and what percentage of the global population lives in the global south as it's defined today? What percentage of the global population lives in the global south? Anybody want to take a guess? Checking in the chat. I have
Yeah,
sight of the chat
they've
now.
not put it on yet. Okay, cool.
Okay. Okay, there's 84% was the highest, and you'll be shocked to know that it's more than 84%. 85% is the next highest, and you'll be shocked to know that it's more than 85%. So it's 88%. And on this, I understand ChatGPT, DeepSeek, and Gemini and Claude all agree. They all might be wrong as well, but basically, if you think about even our international NGOs, right, who have good policies and good advocacy goals and so on, we all don't look anything like what the world looks like. And the global economy, and if you look then at which countries control it, we've got a really skewed up, messed up system. So we should be very clear that when we're thinking about the question of affluenza, the problem we have is some people, a minority, are over consuming on a very serious level, and then a significant number are also under consuming, basic things like food, water, and so on. They don't have it in sufficient quantities. And I always like to tell myself and tell people I'm speaking to, I want to believe that humanity is better than this, right? We must have an ambition that we can design our system that can be better. And this quick last point to be there is I want to say something about design, right? And that is, during COVID, when many people were saying the social contract is broken, I eventually said, you know what? I don't think the social contract is broken. I think the social contract is, the contract between citizens and the leaders. I think the social contract is working exactly as it was designed to work, which was to give crumbs to the majority, give a little bit more to people at the middle so that they have a vested interest in the system, and the top, 0.1% sucks up, the most of the resources um, that are available for humanity's existence. Sorry, that answer was a bit long. Thank you.
So helpful. Thank you. I want to go to Joanna's question. There's some questions in the Q&A, and I also do want to remind everyone that you can use the raise hand button. I would love to try it. You should be able to raise hand, and then we can do allow to talk. This would be so cool to hear your voices as well in this conversation. Hear kind of where you're coming from with your question. But in the Q&A so far, we have Joanna who's asking, which are the main actions, I guess, like which are the main things that we can do to put in place to address the fossil fuel problem? So is it reducing transportation? What are the alternatives? What should we be doing? And what should our governments be claiming to do? So I thought that was a nice kind of leeway into also what is this fossil fuel treaty? What are you asking governments to do at this point?
So the good news is that the solutions are now available to us, right? It's not like we don't know how to make the transition from an economy that is driven by dirty brown fossil fuel-based energy to an economy that's driven by clean, green, renewable-based energy. Uh, so we need to figure out a micro, meso, and macro level of to answer this question, what can we do? Okay. By micro, I mean, what can I do as a human being, which all of us feel as an individual, we must answer that question, right? And what can we do in our smallest base units, our family and our immediate community? And I would say there are things that we can do around looking at lifestyle changes and looking at greening communities and so on. And the important thing is we have to find those things to do. We have to find multiple pathways in which people can participate, right? Because even if that participation is not, having a structural or systemic impact, that participation is also offering to people a way to deal with isolation, with the growing mental health crisis stemming from eco-anxiety and climate anxiety and so on. At the meso level, where I'm talking about policy changes, we have to push our governments to transition as fast as possible away from fossil fuels, stop new investments in fossil fuels, recognizing that right now, they keep saying, even though now solar and wind, for example, is much cheaper than almost all other forms of energy, but when you factor in the fact that taxpayer subsidies to the tune of trillions of dollars are going to oil companies, gas companies, and coal companies as we speak, right? We are using taxpayer money, right, to kill our children's futures, essentially in the name of short-term interest. And let's be blunt about it. This is happening because the powerful interests in the fossil fuel industry lied and continued to lie, hid the science because their scientists were the ones who first discovered it, the threat of fossil fuels. That's why they picked up the heights of the drilling platforms in oceans and so on. And so we have to advocate for no fresh investments. Now, many of the governments and even corporations in their marketing like to just say, oh, the problem is just simply the way you consume, and you as an individual need to make your changes and everything will be fine. So, as I said, used to say when I was at Greenpeace, recycling is a good place to start. It's not a good place to end. Okay. So, the last thing I would say is, though, find things to do that give you joy, right? Like if you're an art teacher, don't get yourself in a situation where you are taking minutes at a meeting where it's like boring to hell, right? Rather use your artistic skills to work with young people in communities and educate them and do murals in the community and that kind of thing, right? So we have to just agree the other thing we have to do is mass awareness raising around this because people don't recognize how close to the cliff we already are. And when things start, because you see, the science uses three words. We need to avert catastrophic, runaway, irreversible climate change. Where are we right now? Thankfully, we're not yet at reversible, we're not yet at runaway, but we are in the first phase of catastrophe, right? We are seeing the extreme weather events, livelihoods being lost, and so on. So I think there are multiple ways in which institutions and people can respond. But I think it's important to do something local, practical that you can touch and feel with your hands for your own mental well-being. You've got to put lots of your energy in changing the policy environment. And the treaty is basically saying nations need to come together as soon as possible. And after the Columbia Conference in the Pacific, we'll host the next meeting where we hope negotiations would start officially towards a treaty. So I'll just conclude. Some of you might be saying, this guy is a crazy guy. How can he think that you can get a treaty when you got, a fascist in the White House and all of that? But there is a precedent here. The landmine treaty, admittedly a less complicated treaty to negotiate, but was negotiated completely outside of the UN system, 44 nations, right? And signed it, and then took it to the UN General Assembly and got it voted at the General Assembly. And when you bring it at that point, nobody's going to put up their hands and say, I want fossil fuels, I want fossil fuels, I love fossil fuels, right? Like nobody said, I want landmines. So even though powerful nations might not sign, but the social license would have been taken away, and you will see the kind of change we saw with landmines, which right until Russia invaded Ukraine, we had a complete drop off in the production and use of landmines. So it is possible, there is a precedent to do it. It's within human creativity and ingenuity. And given that other things have not worked, we cannot do what Albert Einstein once urged us not to do, when he said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get different results. And so we're not saying that We have to kill the UNFCCC. It has its place. It does do some important work, but we need something additional and complementary that goes to the root cause of the problem, which is turning off the tap on fossil fuels.
Great, thank you. Another question from Satya is, do we have in our collective cultural memory a time where we can turn to which models, the solutions we are looking to apply? So are there historic examples of this, and especially in the collective cultural instance? Um, and if so, yeah, what would you say more about it? Don't know if that's coming across clearly, but I know your link to the work of artivism and indigenous knowledge and wisdom. Maybe there are examples or stories that you can share that kind of connect these stories to this conversation today.
So thank you very much for that question. And it's critical because you see, one of the things that we are missing most at the moment, right, is actually imagination. We are struggling to imagine a different future. What can a well-being economy look like? What can a society that is driven by clean energy rather than, energy that destroys us? Not to say that there's no complications with rare earth materials and human rights violations that we see in the Democratic Republic of Congo when we're trying to secure some of those things for solar panels and so on. So I don't want to paint everything as kind of, easy to do. It's hard to do, right? But it is, very much within human creativity. And we can see it's a question of, we cannot change the science. All we can change, is political will. So that's one problem. The second thing is, and I'm so glad that you've raised the issue of arts and culture. Thank you for that. So the way I put it in a one-liner, I would say harnessing the full power of arts and culture to address the climate crisis and the intersecting crises will not deliver our salvation from the climate crisis or the intersecting crises. However, failure to harness the power of arts and culture almost guarantees we will fail, right? The third thing I would say is we have to bring joy into what we do, right? I speak to you as a parent whose son decided to transition at the age of 34, right? Brilliant young man, musician, prime of his career. Everywhere in the world I go to, I am hearing pain, especially of young people, right? And one of the things they say is this. They say, like in South Africa, what our kids tell us is, they appreciate the fact that we fought the struggle and we lost our friends and we were in prison, exile, and, buried lots of people we loved and all who were murdered by the regime. But then they say, but you all had one thing that we don't have. Anybody knows what that is? Hope that things will get better, right? And that is a very painful thing for us to hear. So what I would say that we need arts and culture right now to sustain us in the struggle, right? And the examples in South Africa, for example, during the anti-apartheid struggle, I can tell you we would never have survived without song and dance, right? Even when the army would be in front of you, we'd be singing and dancing, you know? It gave us strength, it gave us power, and so on. But I want to give you another simple example, right? Just to give you a sense of sometimes what can change consciousness is not really that expensive or that difficult to organize. So when I was the Secretary General of Amnesty International, I got a call from an artist, a friend of mine called Olafur Eliasson, who's from Iceland. And Olafur says, Kumi, I need you to come to Iceland, and I'm hoping you and Mary Robinson can come. I said, what's happening in Iceland, Olafur? He says, we're having a funeral. I say, oh, I'm so sorry. Who passed away? He says, a glacier. And on early Sunday morning, the Prime Minister of Iceland, myself, and Mary Robinson said a few words to several hundred people. We climb up this dead iceberg, which ironically was called okay, but clearly it wasn't okay. It was dead. And there was, people cried. There was a plaque that said, at this moment of history, we know what we need to do. Hopefully you're reading it. Let's hope we did, what we needed to do to save humanity kind of message. And that evening, when we go online to look at the media coverage, it was more impactful than 95% of the actions that happened during my 6 year leadership of Greenpeace. And I say to Oliver, this is amazing. And Oliver says to me, do you know why? Mary Robinson, the Prime Minister, knew, didn't talk about 1.5 degrees, 350 parts per million. You talked about loss. We lost this precious thing that we've had for centuries and it's not coming back. And everybody understands loss, right? So whether you lost a lover or lost somebody through death, family, friend, or colleague. So part of what we need to do is become more people-centric in how we are framing what the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change is, what the struggle to build a new well-being economy. Like say with the well-being economy, for example, you talk to 90% of the people in the world about theories of capitalism, socialism, circular economy, donut economics, all of which, especially the last two, circular economy and donut economics, are very valuable resources that we have, right? What does that mean to an ordinary person, right? You need a dialogue and a message that simply say we want to create a world, right, where we protect the environment and nobody is excluded, and find a more simpler way than that to see it, to say it. So yes, thank you for the question. We have to become better communicators, is what you're suggesting, and I fully agree.
Thank you. And yeah, thanks to Satya for bringing that question, speaking about the fact that we're missing stories and storytelling. And I think for me, that's what I so appreciate about the way that you come into spaces. It's the stories that we remember, and it's the stories that you tell. I'll always think about Uncle Eddie when I'm thinking about how difficult activism is, and just really appreciate that those are the things that stick for most people. There are so many comments here and lots of different suggestions from a technical point of view as well. Caroline's sharing a landmines treaty, and also in the Q&A, there's quite a few different questions. So I'm going to dive into them, although they're a little bit more technical. The one is from Mark Langdon, who is asking if you're familiar with Carla E. Matei's latest book, which is called Escape from Capitalism. Does he agree that the transition, or do you agree that the transition away from oil dependency is leading to the fact that we need to move past capitalism? So I think you've spoken a little bit to that. And what steps can we best take to stimulate a paradigm shift away from a capitalist reality? So I don't know if you've got anything else to add. I know you've already shared a little bit on that. If there's something else.
Just a quick response, right? And that is, um, you know, the Financial Times in London nowadays talks about a post-capitalist economy, right? So we need to become comfortable, right? To be saying that whatever we have right now, you can call it capitalism if you want, right? But traditional capitalism was based on a notion that because you risked your own capital, you should get a higher return for that investment. Today, the CEOs of the biggest companies in the world are risking workers' pension funds to a large extent, and there's no personal risk to them. Even if the company does terribly, they still get their big indefensible bonuses and so on. So we have to recognize that the system is rotten to the core. It needs to be reformed and restructured. However, it's critically important we be very smart at this moment of history. We don't want to destroy that which has been built, because everything that has been built, a school, a clinic, whatever, all of these things were built by the people's efforts and the people's money and taxes, right? It's the people's resources. So I am constantly saying to young people, please do not destroy things, right? Because you allow the enemy to paint you as crazy and irresponsible, and you're destroying that which the community needs. So we have to find a way to transition in a way that's thoughtful, that is understand. And at the end of the day, people talk about winners and losers. If we do this right, most of humanity will win. Because those at the very top, they are suffering from this very serious pathological illness, which, some of us are calling affluenza. We need to cure them from it. In fact, I was thinking if I become unemployed, what I'm going to do is start up an affluenza clinic, which I will offer it as a service to rich people who want to transition to a happy life. If you hear me setting it up and you know any clients, please send them in my direction. So no, the point is well taken. I don't know that book specifically, but I'm certainly going to look out for it. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Great, thanks. Yeah, please, Kumi, you've got too many initiatives that you're already part of. But I'm loving, there's so many questions. I want to go to Dali's question on how do we bypass the racialized class issues that still persist. And for me, I think connecting to what you're speaking about, these just transitions, is it possible within these current global power structures? Do you think it needs a redistribution of power? I think linking to what Dali's saying in terms of racialization as well. Um, yeah, because he says basically
Absolutely.
he's seeing these results in the climate justice space. Yeah, go
Absolutely.
ahead.
Absolutely, we need to do this and we need to hold up a mirror to history, right? See, history should not strangulate us and hold us back. History should liberate us to move forward, right? But you cannot ignore history. And one of the big, terrible historical facts is that why did the slave owners eventually give up slavery and we didn't have a choice but to give up slavery? One of the reasons was the advent of fossil fuels, because the discovery of coal meant this, with the steam engine and so on, that labor needs changed and, some of the labor got, so, and when we look, and why I always ask the question about what percentage of the world's population lives in global south, you can just see even our most highly respected international NGOs, including two that I led, Greenpeace and Amnesty, fall short when it comes to answering the question, is that institution structurally racist or not? So we have to recognize that we have to do quite a lot of work to make sure that, as Gandhi put it, be the change you want to see in the world, right? So our own institutions and so on reflect the inequities, the contradictions of power, and all of that. And by the way, it's not surprising. It's bound to happen. It's bound to happen. We just have to acknowledge it and say, okay, this is where we are. How do we move forward? Because certain things are completely outside of our control. As we sit in this meeting, right? There are some of us, if work says you need to go to South Africa or to most countries in the world, you can make a decision today and jump on a plane tomorrow, right? For those of us like me, who out of principle did not take any passport of any other country other than my own, South Africa, and sometimes I have to tell you, I kick myself why I didn't take one. But I feel I sleep better with the decision, though. It's like doing a mini thesis each time you apply for a visa, right? In fact, I jokingly say if I were to write a book about my time working globally, looking like somebody who gets mistaken to being Muslim, Afghani, Mexican, and so on, that the title of my book would be Visas, if you pardon me using some French, Visas, fucking visas, you know. Uh, by the way, Obi, I was at Kate Raywood's place on Saturday night for dinner, and we talked about the donut circus, which I miss in Paris. But we also did a very interesting debate, which was called Green Growth is a Myth. And Kate, myself, and Anna Jones, who ran the Earthshot Prize, was one side. But we almost lost. Do you know why? Most people were with us, but Luisa Neunauber, a young climate activist from Germany, from Fridays for the Future, she was, even though she didn't believe that green growth was effective, but she was so brilliant, she argued so well that anyway, it ended up in a draw. But I'm sorry to have missed you that there. But I'll just say to people, there were some of the sessions that Change Now that you might want to see online because some of them were actually quite good because it was very focused on climate. Thank you.
And yeah, can't wait to hear more about that. And watch the videos. And also completely agree that humor is also just such an amazing vehicle to unlock a lot of these conversations and help people resonate um, in audiences where there's so much different perspectives. And I think, yeah, it speaks to the arts, as Kumi was saying just now. I think on the last note, Satya's got another question as well, just around joy. How do you personally kind of build a life around joy? And what is the function of joy being for you, especially in this current time?
This is a very difficult question because, it's one thing giving advice, it's another thing taking it. So sadly, my life has had far too much of trauma, but, with personally and in public life, with all the death I saw around me as a young activist growing up in South Africa. But what gives me joy is um, family, friends, and uh, and also, you know, young people, just as a generic, outside of family and friends, right? I get a real lot of joy engaging with young people because young people will tell you straight in your face. If you say to them, based on my experience, we should do this or do that, and they'll say back to you, you know what, your generation is contaminated by really bad experience. We don't want your experience. We want to create our own experience. And that's the kind of thinking we actually need right now. We need uh, the fresh lenses of younger people to look at old intractable problems in a new, fresh way and challenge. It's not to say that people of my generation don't have anything to contribute. We have something to contribute, but I would argue that we have much less to contribute than young people and people who understand the digital environment and the communications environment that we're in much better than a digital immigrant like myself, understands it. And so for me, um, I do also things like meditate. My wife makes me walk. So does WEAll occasionally, by the way. She forced me to walk not too long ago. And if I'm brutally honest, I've not found the balance yet between creating enough time for inner development and personal healing. But I want to end on a somewhat radical note for some people, and that is my biggest healing and joy comes from, I would say specifically healing, comes from embracing the healing power of indigenous knowledge. And this includes for me and my wife, uh, who's my comrade and partner in all of this work I do these days. Uh, we are deeply believing of that one of the things that colonialism tried to do was to decimate indigenous knowledge and systems and so on. And it's amazing that indigenous knowledge systems have survived, notwithstanding the onslaught. And part of that is also recognizing the healing power of plant medicine and understanding that, in fact, even areas like Gabon in Central Africa, they have economic potential by harnessing the healing power of something called iboga, which is sought after around the world for healing. So, yeah, you're right. If some of you are Googling, it is in the space of psychedelic science and psychedelic medicine. And I think right now, with the global mental health crisis we have, we need to be opening ourselves up to multiple ways of healing and not thinking that only the Western way of healing and the Western way of arriving at joy is the only way we can get there. There is, of course, many things in Western psychology as well as in Western culture, but it has always been put as the norm and exclusively. We need to be looking everywhere now uh, in the world for sources of healing, sources of joy, and um, and just the search for finding what gives you joy. The search can be as joyful as what you actually end up doing in itself is what I've found quite helpful for myself because most of the time I'm like searching for what's going to help rather than necessarily finding it quickly, if that makes any sense. Thanks. Well, I have to say this was more spiritual and than economic, and I'm pleased for that. I'm pleased for that. I hope I didn't go too. Uh,
It's really what we needed, I think, Kumi. And I think it just speaks to everything that we've been saying, right? We've been I guess you were saying sometimes the approach or the process is better than the actual outcome. And that's something that we actually hold on to at WEAll. If we can change the way that we do things, if we can be inclusive, if we can think about participation, if we can think about pre-distribution, the design of things, the approach really can sometimes actually be the solution within itself. And so this has been spot on. And I think definitely what was needed for today. I have been on so many spaces where people are feeling just really spiritually lost, and there's a spiritual heaviness, I think, as well. So I think this has been really needed. But I also just want to thank you for your honesty. I think this is the only way we should be showing up as just more honest and more vulnerable and more open. And I really want to encourage people that are on this call, if you are used to quite clinical WEAll spaces, we are hoping to have a lot more heart in our spaces going forward. I don't know how you felt about the webinar. I really missed the meetings, and I definitely think we'll switch back so I can see people's faces and responses. But I do want to say thank you so much for your comments and your thoughts and your questions in the chat. It's been really helpful to kind of see how you're processing all of this. There's been so many incredible suggestions as well in terms of resources. And yeah, just want to say thank you to every single person that joined. Kumi, thank you for you joining, especially, in the busyness of your schedule. I never know how you do it. But also just thank you to your family for allowing us to have you for this time. I understand that it is a public holiday. To those who have just been part of this community for the first time, I've shared links to our website. I've shared links to the Fossil Fuel Treaty website. Please do follow those pages to find out more. I've also shared my email address. If there's any other questions, if you want to be part of webinars like this going forward, and if you want to be part of this community, we'd love to have you. So please do pop me an email and I'll share further steps. We are over time, so I do want to also just say a huge thank you to Matilde, who's been translating so wonderfully, and Anna, who's been on tech support as well. We really appreciate the both of you. Sending so much love to everybody. Keep
Thank
showing
you.
up, keep engaged. And yeah,
Thank
I
you,
hope to
everyone.
see you all soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.